for real. Hello, everybody. We are working on Unit 4 tonight, in which we are going into a unit where we're going to learn how to create Java applications that can interface with a database, which is a very powerful capability, by the way, and very employable at the same time. As you read your chapter, and let's actually talk about the chapters here, because right now we are actually exiting the textbook and going to one of the web bonus chapters. And we are currently, as we teach this session here, we are in the spring semester of 2021, and we are using the 11th edition of the Daniel Liang textbook. And in that edition, the 11th edition, we are looking at chapter 34. It is not a printed chapter, so it's not physically part of the book. It's one of the dozen or so bonus chapters that comes with the book. If you happen to be using the 10th edition, either electronic or otherwise, that bonus chapter is chapter 32. However, I want you guys to all be aware that in the resources folder within our course shell, I have all the bonus chapters and all the source code and stuff that comes with the book posted here. And so you can get that chapter 34 PDF right from this location. Now, I'm going to kind of jump into the book here right away, and it's probably not what you guys anticipated here as I start out, because I do want to show you how the book proceeds with this topic and then how we're going to proceed, and it differs. So if I had any of you that tried to work ahead, you may have, like maybe you're doing in your PHP classes, maybe we're tempted to create what we call a local server on your machine to run a database in order to connect your applications. And most textbooks, when they teach this topic, they teach you exactly that way. Now, there's a reason for that. The reason is this. First of all, most people, when they're doing this type of work, don't have a remote database they can connect to. So even a lot of schools that teach HTML and web programming, often the students are always working on their own local machine. They're never uploading anything to a server. Here at Gateway, since we have servers available to us, and people that know how to run them, which helps, we think that it's a much more valuable experience to work with a live server, because when you go out to the workplace, guess what you're going to do? And isn't it better to have that experience coming out of school, and you can walk into the job and say, oh yeah, I know how to FTP, I know how to remote connect to a database, et cetera, et cetera. The book, however, as it proceeds through its instructions, it talks about what a database is, and we'll get to all that. But they get to this page here in the chapter when they start talking about creating an account, and basically none of the steps that you see here are going to work for you unless you've installed a local web server. In some extreme circumstances, we run into issues with some students who just, for whatever reason, cannot get the VPN software installed that we're about to install. And in that case, you might have to revert to using a locally installed web server. If you are in that situation, I'm going to recommend a few products for you right off the bat. The first one is probably the most popular and most important one, and it's called, I always called it Xampp, but everybody here at Gateway calls it Xampp. And really what it is, it's a combination of software that's packaged together that behaves like a web server. So it's got Apache, MySQL, and PHP all bundled into it, and it runs on your own machine, and then you can create websites on your own hard drive, and they will actually run. Now, what a lot of people don't realize is when you're doing PHP work, the reason you need to do that is because PHP code does not work like HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. It requires a server to execute its code before it pushes back to the browser. So you have to have the web server software, typically Apache or what we call Nginx, and then you have to have the PHP server running as well. And typically, whenever you're doing PHP work, you're often connecting to a MySQL database, so you have to have that tool running as well. And that would run locally on your own machine, and then you would remote connect basically back to your own machine to test your software. The problem with code like PHP is without that server-side piece, you cannot see the code run. So, depending on who's teaching you PHP, most likely it's Wendy these days. She'll often have you install this software, you run it on your own machine. Now, I was never a fan of that. I always preferred to have the students upload to Apollo and then run their PHP from there, because that's really what you do in the real world. But the key is, and I want you guys to hear this and understand this, is server-side code requires a server in order for it to do what it does. You cannot just run it from your hard drive without a piece of software. This is probably the preeminent piece of software used for that. It is made by the Apache organization, the same people that put together Apache web server software that runs on most Linux machines. It has bundled into it a whole bunch of tools aside from the three that I just talked about, but those are the three primary ones: Apache, MySQL, and PHP. Another product that works really well on a Windows machine is one called Wamp. And I actually, frankly, prefer this one to Xampp. It's not as powerful, it's not as controllable, but I find it more reliable. So when I'm doing like local PHP development and I don't want to push it to a server, this is my go-to product. Not to be outdone, if you're a Mac person, by the way, yes, there is a Wamp software as well for Macs that you can download and install, and it does basically the same thing on your Mac. However, I do want to point out that on a Mac, because it's basically already a Unix machine, you really don't need this. All those servers can be installed through the command line on a Mac and run natively in the background. But I'm going to caution you once again, this is a fail-safe, right? However, some of you, because of the fact that you will be in a PHP class or just want to experiment with this stuff, might be intrigued enough to download and install it. So here's the information for you. But we're using a different approach. So here's our approach. In order to connect up to the server, we need a special type of software called VPN software. I'm just going to sillily, that's not what I meant to type there. Sorry. I want to just do a straight Google search here. Let's see if we can stop this page from loading here. Stop. Okay. And I'm just doing a straight search on VPN. And many of you probably already know what VPN software is, but basically VPN stands for Virtual Private Network. And there are certain resources within large organizations that sometimes require an encrypted connection in order to connect to them. And for us, databases and command line access to our web server are two of those features that require this service. Now, some of you might already be familiar with VPN software. So there's lots of people that use VPN software privately. Does anybody have an example of what you might use VPN software for privately?
I mean, I have it on my phone just like for security purposes. Okay. So nobody can like
Netflix shows.
You know what? Javier's kind of onto it. What were you going to say, Cody?
Nothing.
Okay, maybe that's wise. Because I use VPN too, but I use it for a number of different reasons. And I'm not talking about the one I'm about to demonstrate, but I use one privately. And what a lot of like people don't realize is when you subscribe to a service, and Netflix is a perfect example. When you're in the US and you subscribe to Netflix, they give you certain titles, right? But if you're in Europe and you subscribe to Netflix, you have a whole different array of shows to watch. And it's all because of the licensing. And so one of the things that I sometimes do is I'll VPN my connection over to Europe. So I get a European IP address. They go, oh, you're in Switzerland or England or Germany or something. And they're like, here's all the shows you can't see on Netflix normally, right? That's one reason. People also use it to kind of protect their traffic in transit. So if you're doing financial transactions and stuff, just be careful where you get your IP address from, because some companies really, like if you're pulling like, I don't know, a Russian IP address, maybe some American companies wouldn't like that too much, like depending on what you're trying to connect to. Now, when you do VPN like that, most services have certain pieces of software they use. Not to confuse matters, but there's software out there that you can download that's open. Hypothetically, you can use it with any platform, provided you have your settings correct. Unfortunately, to connect to Gateway, that's not how it works. Even Windows has built-in VPN software, and a lot of people don't realize that. But we need to use a very specific set of tools from Gateway. In order to be able to access these tools, you need to have a VPN account. So you can't even get to download it unless you have the account. And what I did, by the way, is for all of you in advance of this class, actually I did it a few weeks ago, I had a ticket put in to create accounts for everybody. And I'm putting this in the chat window, by the way. the link. And I want you to be really careful. I prefer that you click the link because this is an HTTPS link and you have to have the S in there. But once you follow this link, this will take you to Gateway's VPN homepage. And I'm waiting for this to load up here. Boy, it's being a little hesitant. And I should check to see if my VPN is turned on. It is. Yeah. So here's what's happening with mine. Mine's not connecting because I'm already connected to the VPN. It's going like, what are you doing? It's like, you're already there. Why are you trying to connect? So here's what's going to happen. I'm going to disconnect from the VPN. You guys may momentarily lose me in the Zoom session, but the recording is going to continue. So the hiccup should be really momentary. So here it goes. I'm disconnecting the connection right now. All right. And I'm back. Are you guys back? Okay, good. All right. So we didn't lose too much.
Still here.
All right. So let's try that link one more time. So it's https://vpn-home.gtc.edu. And once you've typed that in, you should be transported to this page. And now you're going to choose to log on. Now, they just recently switched this. In the past, you would just use your same username and ID that you use for email or whatever, or Blackboard. But now they've tied this in to the one login service. And I'm curious to see what happens as I do the login here. Okay, so yeah, well, they're giving us the message that it's going to be added, but I'm telling you right now, it's already been added. But once you get past these logins, you will land on this page. And this is the piece of software that we are using to connect to VPN at Gateway. So this is called Cisco Anyconnect Secure Mobility Client. Now, here's the funky thing about this. If you go out to the web, you can search this, and you might even get lucky and find a download of it. Might, and I say might, right? But all of these downloads are customized and proprietary to whatever institution they're attached to. So this one that you're downloading from this page is the only one that's going to work to connect to Gateway. So please go ahead and do the download for Windows or Mac and download the installer to your machine. You can see that I've got it down here. Now, I'm not going to walk through the manual process of installing the software. I think that it's a really easy install if I remember right. But maybe since one of you might be doing it right now, does anybody want to share their screens and we can record that into the video?
Mine's still downloading, but
Mine's
it looks like
verify by text.
yeah, it did that for me too. I just clicked the verify by text because my phone's right next to me, and then it went to this.
Yep, yeah. And if you use the multi-factor authentication, see, I'm already logged into one login, so that's what we're talking about here. So one login will ask for probably a text verification of some sort to allow the download. But is anybody willing to share screens to show the install?
I just have the install pop up.
All right. Jay, stay right there. Don't click any buttons. Let's get you up on screen here. And you should be able to share. Your faces are going to be in the video here for just a moment, just by the way. Yep, and you can quickly turn off your cameras if you want to hide. All right, Jay, are you sharing?
Yeah, it says this is up to the screen sharing. Yep. Do that screen. Okay. So.
All right. So here's Jay doing the install. Go ahead and click through. You must accept.
Ta-da.
Yep. And it goes pretty fast. So this product will on occasion want to update as well.
Mm-hmm.
So let's see how quickly this goes. All right. That's all there is to it. Pretty darn simple. Now, the one thing that you will notice is, yeah, you're looking for it to be running right now. But in order to get it running, Jay, why don't you go ahead and go to your start menu. And now just start typing, well, there it is, Cisco. And now in the box, can you pull that box to the center of the screen?
That's me.
All right. And here you want to type that same URL, but without the HTTPS. So now you will just type vpn-home.gtc.edu and go ahead and connect. Okay, this will want you to do the one login thing again. So go ahead and do your stuff. And Jay, thank you for sharing the screen. I appreciate it.
No problem. And my phone's right next to me, so.
Lucky you get a signal. See, I'm in the basement and I don't
Oh
even
no,
and so I have to like run upstairs to go get the signal.
I'm in my room sitting next to a window. My
Fantastic.
router's on the other side of this wall, like right next to where I'm at.
All right. Now it looks like it's downloading some of the components. And with any luck here, Jay, you're all connected up and you are connected. Now, what you're doing there, perfect. And that little icon, can you go back to that just for a second since we're recording it? That icon will appear. And whenever you want to disconnect from the VPN, and with VPN, by the way, you want to use it to do the thing you're doing and then usually disconnect from it when you're done. You don't usually want to
Makes
stay
sense.
connected. At this point, what's happened is your IP address for your machine has now been switched from your own local network to an IP address on Gateway's network. So now you're being recognized as a machine on Gateway's local network, and now you will be able to access the database through your application. So that's the process of install. And Jay, thank you for sharing the screen. If you wouldn't mind stopping the share now, and I'll take control back, if we want to call it that. And I'll move your faces off the screen. All right, so I'm going to pause the video here for a second just to check in with everybody. So at this point, I'm assuming that everybody here in class managed to get the VPN client installed and functional and connected so that you can see it in your system tray down here with the lock enabled. Now, you're noticing that mine is not. So I'm going to go ahead and reactivate mine. So once again, the people in the Zoom session here, you might lose me momentarily as I connect. It should really only be a brief hiccup.
You're also not sharing your screen, Ty.
Yeah, screen's not shared.
All right. Well, the screen is shared now. Thank you for reminding me. I appreciate that. But I am logging back into the VPN now. And hopefully it doesn't want me to do the second authentication again. Oh, it sure is.
Oh no.
All right, so I have mine connected. My phone is basically allowing me in. And of course, they're doing this just to improve security, folks. But now that we're connected, you will see that little icon down here, once again, with the lock on it. Okay. And that means that you have that secure connection. The next thing that we're going to do is we're going to download a piece of software that we need in order to do the next steps. And folks, this is pretty fun because we're going to use kind of what we call a sort of a primitive looking piece of software called Putty. And I want you just to go to Google and just type the word Putty, like P-U-T-T-Y. And the first link that should come back is this link from putty.org. And so we're going to go right to this website. It's a very, very basic website. In fact, you basically only have 3 options here. But we're going to take the first tool that they have here. So you can see it says you can download Putty here. So I'm going to click that link and take us to that page. There are many different versions you can download and explore, but we're going to keep it pretty darn simple here. And we're going to grab probably one of these first couple right here. Now, if you want, you can download and launch the installer and run it. 32-bit or 64-bit, frankly, really doesn't make much of a difference for this. What we are downloading is a type of software called TTY software, which is used to do terminal connections. In other words, command line connections to remote Unix or Linux machines. Putty just happens to be one of the most popular free tools out there. The one thing that I sometimes point out to people is if you don't want to do the installer, and I do recommend that you're probably best off doing the installer. The whole installation process really is just putting one single exe file on your machine. So if you want, you could just scroll down the list here and just come directly down to one of these two. And if you're on a 64-bit system, which most of us are, you may as well just grab the 64-bit version of it and download it. And it's just a matter of clicking it, and it should just download immediately. You might get a security warning because it is an executable file. So if you have antivirus software or you haven't approved this site in your security list or whatever, it will maybe try to stop you from downloading it directly. But it is one single file to run it. Once you have that file downloaded in your downloads folder, I suggest that you pull the file out of that download folder. So here I am with that download right here. And what I would suggest that you do is pull it out of here by just simply doing a right-click cut and then find a place on your hard drive to put it. Now, if you've had me in classes before, especially when we use like portable software or weird software like this, I sometimes coach people to go to their documents folder and then create a folder called software. And you see, normally I typically do that, but I'm not keeping that kind of stuff on my C drive anymore. I actually have an auxiliary drive in my machine where I do have a software folder, you notice, and most likely I already have Putty in here. So you see I already have it. I've also taken the step of adding a shortcut to this in my start menu because I use it fairly often. But once you have that thing somewhere other than your downloads folder, go ahead and launch it. I'm just going to go to my start menu and type Putty, and you'll see how it pulls it up. And then when you get this software running, it has frankly, a super simplistic interface, very primitive looking, in fact. But that does not mean it's not powerful. Really what we're doing here is we're setting a bunch of settings to allow us to connect to Apollo on the command line. What I'm going to do here is I'm just going to simply go to this box that I'm highlighting. And this is really the only box you need to use on this whole thing, frankly. And you just type the name of the Apollo server. So apollo.gtc.edu. You don't need to change the port. The only other thing you really need to worry about is that it's set to SSH, which is the protocol that we're using to connect. And then you just simply click open. So I'm going to go ahead and do that process. And if it was successful, you will get a login prompt. If you are not connected to the VPN, I just want to reiterate this. If you are not connected to VPN already, this will not work. It will not allow you to connect. You must be connected to VPN first. That lock's got to be in place. Then you can connect. Now I'm going to go ahead and establish a connection here. So I'm going to log in using one of my accounts. So I'll use one of my junk accounts. And now I need to put in my password. And now I'm logged in. So once you log into Apollo on the command line, you should see something similar to this. It might not be quite as verbose for you, but it might be. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to pause the video and check in on everybody. As you connect to Apollo, you would use the same password here that you would use when connecting to the FTP server, by the way. So as we're doing the install here, the one thing I forgot is that if you are doing this for the first time connecting to a server, you will typically get a connection security warning like this. So in other words, we don't have digital certificates set up to validate authenticity of the server. So you'll get this message that's pretty scary and a lot to read. But basically it's saying, do you want to go ahead and connect here? Are you sure this is where you want to go? And you do want to say yes to this, by the way. So go ahead and say yes. And so now you're at the prompt. So go ahead and put in your username. Oh, we're going to have an issue with your database, Javier, but we'll have to fix that separately. I think I gave you the wrong username for your database.
Okay.
All right, no, go back to the prompt. I want to see that you can log in. All right, and then go ahead and put in your password.
Yep. Oops. Let's see.
Now, one thing you'll notice is as you're working at a command prompt on a Linux system, so this knocked you off. I don't know what you did, but it knocked you off. You'll notice that it does not echo back the characters you're typing. And on a Linux system, that's considered a security feature, by the way. Because one hack that people have if they're trying to steal your password is they can count how many characters are in it just by seeing how many you typed. If they don't echo back, they can't guess. They have to hear the keystrokes. So Javier, let's try connecting to that again.
Okay.
So click back up into the window.
Okay.
Well, it looks like it's still waiting. Try typing your password again.
Okay. Sorry, I forgot my password. It was given to me by PHP teacher.
Well, I'll tell you what. Maybe you should stop sharing your screen right now, because if you're looking up your password, we don't want to all know it. So I'm going to pause the video, folks. All right. My hope is from taking a little break here and checking in with everybody that everybody was successfully able to connect to VPN and then download and install Putty if that's what was needed, and then connect to Apollo using the command line. So with your username and your password, and then you end up with a prompt that looks like a $sign. And that's not a mistake. That's what it should look like. Okay. It seems like everybody connected successfully, which is fantastic. Sometimes it takes a little while in class, and the bigger the class, sometimes the longer it takes. But there's lots of little technological issues that can happen. The one thing that I do want to point out for people that might be working on either a Macintosh or a Linux machine, and you see I'm pulling up my Notepad++ here to connect on one of those machines.
Can't see your screen.
Oh, so of course you can. So I love these videos, right? Because I'm just like screwing up all over the place, but that's okay. It's par for the course. So if you're on a Mac or Linux computer, open your terminal program. That's the first thing that you want to do. So each one of those platforms will have a program, usually just called terminal, like this. And whether it's GUI or a command line, you have, well, if you're at the command line, you're already at the terminal. But if you're in the GUI for any operating system, you should be able to open up a terminal window, which will look a lot like Putty. And then to connect to the system, you would simply put in your SSH command at the prompt, a space, your username at apollo.gtc.edu, and that's how you log in. And so some people say, well, how come Mac and Linux people don't have to download Putty? Well, that's because they're already on a Linux machine, basically, is the answer. In Windows, we're not, so we need a special piece of software to allow it. Now, interestingly, and I do this more for computer information than anything else, is for a couple of releases now, Windows 10 has actually allowed the Windows command prompt to natively run some Linux commands. Although they're really quirky, and I haven't found them to be stable enough yet to use in class, but they're moving towards that, by the way, and some capabilities are already present. So hypothetically, you could type that same command at a Windows prompt, and it might work, or it might not, but when you get connected, some of the interfaces are different. You usually have to make some settings changes to get it to work smoothly. But this is what you do on a Mac or a Linux machine. Open your terminal program, type this at the command line, press enter, type in your password, and you will be connected. Right, now I'm going to jump back over to our book, wherever that ended up on the screen here. And I got lucky and guessed the first tab. And what we're going to do now is we're going to proceed with the chapter instructions. I'm not doing the lecture part on what databases are and all that. We'll come back to that piece of it. But I do want to walk through these commands here and which ones you should ignore and which ones you should pay attention to. So some of this we will run and some of it we will not. So here's what we're going to do first. We're going to go over to the prompt, and we're going to type, let me find my prompt. So from the $ prompt, you want to make sure you click into the window. And once you're clicked into the window, you want to type the following command. Let's first log in to the MySQL software. And we're going to type this command. So we're going to type MySQL, all lowercase. I'm going to type a -u, a space. Then I'm going to type in my username. That's my username. Yep, it's pretty silly. And then followed by -p. So the anatomy of what we just typed here is I'm telling the system I want to run MySQL. I want to log in with the username AAAAA, and please ask me for my password. That's what that command says. Okay, so I'm going to press enter here. Does everybody have that typed in? And here, what I'll do is I'll also put it in the chat window if that's helpful. But in the chat window, you have to replace username with your actual username. And you know, when I made a mistake, I typed MySQL with uppercase letters, all lowercase, by the way. Once you've typed that in, go ahead and come back to the Putty window here and press enter. You will be prompted for your password again. So really what's happening is we're logging into a different server on the server. We're logging into the database server on Apollo now. So I'm going to put in my password and press enter. You'll notice that from all of these prompts on the Linux system, your password type-ins never echo back characters, right? So just take it on faith that those characters are being sent. If you're successfully logged into MySQL, you will now see in your command prompt window a MySQL prompt. All right. And just to see if it's working, if you got the prompt up, right, let's type another command in. And we're going to type this command. We're going to type show space databases semicolon. All right, this is a very basic SQL command that we're going to run at the prompt here that basically is going to show all the databases connected to your account. That's what it should show. You may also, some of you, depending on how your account is set up, you may see a huge list. Did anybody get a huge list? Okay, I got a couple of people. A couple of people.
So actually, I got, when I did my username, I got the not found. That's what I got for me.
Okay.
So it was the negative, what?
Yeah, you know what, Javier? Hang right there. I'll come back and help you in just a sec.
Okay.
Did this command not work for anybody else?
I'm getting access denied for user C. Wilson at localhost for some reason when I'm trying it.
Okay.
Same.
Did you guys log in? Were you successfully logged in? How about that?
Yeah.
Okay. Now keep in mind that your database password, and this is recording into the video, I'm glad it is, your database password may be different than your Apollo password. Okay. So your database password I just set to be your ID number.
That is right.
So
You're
try
right.
that. So I'm going to exit you. For most of you, stay where you're at, but I'm going to exit out and I'm going to type that MySQL command one more time. So you type MySQL -u, your username, space -p, and then your password. Let me know if it worked. You're muted, Tom.
Mine didn't show any databases. It just skipped down a line and shows an arrow.
Okay. If it just did that, did you add a semicolon to your command?
Yeah. But it's waiting for another command.
Yeah. What it's doing is make sure if you don't have a semicolon at the end of the line, and actually I'll demonstrate that. If you don't have a semicolon, it does this.
Okay.
Is that what you're getting?
Yeah, that's what I was getting.
Yeah. So just type a semicolon, press enter, and it'll still do it. Now, for most of you, what it should show is maybe just the root database account and nothing else. Each one of these entries that I have here in mine are unique databases within my own account. For some of you, depending on how the count is configured, and I did it so it shouldn't be that way, you might get a list of everybody's database on the system. That happens too.
Need water.
It was pretty jarring when it popped up. Yeah, like Sam said in the chat, 665 rows of databases.
Okay.
It's still not showing me any databases.
All right. I'm going to take a pause here really quick, and I'm going to come around to each one of you now. I'm going to make sure that you're all good. Okay. All right. So here we go. Tom, so we took a moment here in class to make sure that everybody was logged into MySQL correctly. Everybody was getting the MySQL prompt. Everybody was able to type the show databases command and then get a list of databases on the screen. And depending on how I set up your permissions, you either have a really nice short little list like this, or I think most people are reporting 665 rows of databases. That sounds about right. Considering we have probably a couple thousand users on the Apollo system by now, that's right. All right. So the next step for us is to get to the next part of what we're going to do here. Now, I do want to explain what's happening in this section of the book. And you guys are not seeing my screen again. So now you're seeing my screen. But in this section of the book, but all we really did is basically log in. That's what he did here. Then he goes through this whole process of setting permissions and passwords and users and all this stuff. And this is irrelevant for us because Apollo has an admin that does this work for us. These would be the instructions if you were working on a locally installed server. So if you were running Xampp or Wamp or Mamp or any of those products, these steps would be necessary, but they are not necessary for you. All right, and that's really important. All right, the next part of this is the creating of the database. So now what we just did is we logged in. So you notice he doesn't, put spaces between the U and the username and the P and the password. And yeah, you can hard code your password in plain text at the prompt if you want, but I don't recommend it. Not very secure. And so we're basically now at this step. So this is the next command that we're going to type. And I'm going to go ahead and demonstrate. So I'm going to bring my prompt back over here. And I'm just going to go ahead and say create database, singular, by the way, and then the name of the database. And I want you to wait before you go hitting that enter key, by the way, unless you already have an oops. Well, then you'll be undoing it, I guess. We use a special convention here at Gateway for naming our databases. And I want you guys to follow this convention because it helps us to keep them all straight. So the convention is you type your username first, an underscore, and then your database. And so the database that we're going to create is going to be called Java Book. Now, I do want you to notice something. I already have this, right? So to demonstrate, I'm going to create one called Java Book 2 just for demonstration. But what you should type is create database, your username, an underscore, and then the semicolon, and then go ahead and press enter. And if it succeeds, this is the message you will get on your screen. It will say query OK, one row affected. It created the structure for a database. It is completely empty, but it is now created. And that's the critical part here. So once again, I'm going to take a real quick break here and just check on everybody's status. All right, so I'm going to repeat that. I want us now to validate, since everybody seemed to get it working, that we can see our database in a different manner. So I want you to go to your browser now and bring up a tab in your browser and type the following address: apollo.gtc.edu/ and then all lowercase Phpmyadmin. And by the way, you're going to want to bookmark this one, especially if you've got a PHP class going. And I'm going to make this anticipation that some of you are taking this. This is typically a second semester class. So some of you might be concurrently taking the PHP class right now. and you may have not yet reached the point in the semester where you need a database. Okay. And so when you're in that class, by the way, and your teacher is, well, I got to create databases for you guys. You can, wait a second, Ty already did that for us. All right. So make sure that your teacher knows that you already have a database account. So when you're logged into Phpmyadmin, this is the interface that you will see. So let's talk about what this tool is. Some of you might currently be taking the database class or have completed the database class. In the database class, you use a piece of software called SQL Server as your database, and then you use SQL Server Management Studio as your database management system. That's the software you use to write SQL code and interface with your database. Apollo has a database also, but that database runs on MySQL. It's an open source database that is really super popular in the open source world for running websites. In fact, a majority of the world's websites run on top of MySQL databases. And this interface that we're looking at is a web-based database management system called Phpmyadmin, a very standard installation on most Linux web servers. And so whenever you want to interface with your database, or you want to validate that the information that we're taking from our application is reaching your database, you can come into this interface and look at your database and do all your database tasks. Now, one question I'll get asked from people right off the bat, especially those that are a little bit database savvy, they'll say to me, Ty, how come we didn't come into Phpmyadmin to create the database? And the answer to that question is we disallow it. We don't allow you to create the database. The very first database has to be made from the command line. That's just a security feature on our behalf. It also is kind of a roundabout way of forcing you guys to kind of touch the Unix or Linux command line a little bit so you don't freak out to it in the future. And it's really not that big of a deal because most of the time the commands that you're going to type there are ones that will probably be given to you. But if you're really curious about it, if you want, you can come back to this prompt anytime and learn how to operate Unix machine from a command prompt. It totally can be done, right? The other interesting thing here is the interface that I'm seeing inside of Putty right now. You'll notice that my prompt says MySQL, right? Which means I'm currently logged into MySQL from the prompt. And from this prompt, I can type any SQL command that I would type into SQL Server, for example, Management Studio. So if you had like a query you wanted to write, and I wanted to type like select from users where whatever SQL statement you know how to type, you can operate it from the command line here and it will work. And you know what? In the old days, this is how we did all our database work, was all from the command line. And all those SQL statements that you learn execute from the command line. Now, Phpmyadmin, frankly, for web developers, is probably one of the most useful database management systems, very simply because just about every single web host I can think of that I've ever touched will have this tool available for you to interface with your database. And it's browser-based. That's the other beautiful thing about it. So we can operate everything inside the browser. So if I want to look, for example, at my account, and this is my account way at the top. You see why I name it all A's now? Because it's way at the top of the list, my strategy. And I just created, for the sake of example, Java Book 2. I already have a Java book, but if I come here, I can actually look at the database. And this one is, yes, empty. I haven't done anything with it. But if I look at Java Book, this one, which is what we're about to load up, I'm going to provide for you a SQL file with your assignment that we're going to run inside this interface. And then that will build our database and populate it with data. That's the next step that we're going to take. So this is a really important tool. And frankly, as you learn how to become a web developer and you start working with, most notably PHP as a backend language, and you start working with MySQL databases, Phpmyadmin will be your primary tool as a web developer to manipulate your database, look at the data, change entries, make sure it's working, run queries, whatever you need to do, this interface will be a very, very useful tool for you. For any of the people who are students here right now, and I'm trying to think of anybody who might be on the list here I can easily find. So Cody, for example, here's your database account, and it looks like you have a bunch of stuff already in here, right? So you've had this before, and all of these databases come with your account. So I see that you have the Java book account, and I can click into it, and I can see that it's blank, right? If I was interested, like if you want to like use this product the same way that you use SQL Server Management Studio, and you wanted to create a table or something, you could simply go to the SQL tab at the top, and now you have your coding window. I can write my queries right here, then come down here to the corner, hit the button, and it will do whatever database works. So any of the stuff that you're doing in your database class, folks, you can usually take those same commands, bring them over to MySQL, same language, a couple little differences, but basically the same languages, drop it in here, and it will execute. I think it's pretty cool to know how to do. So this is a really good thing to bookmark, apollo.gtc Phpmyadmin. You have to log in with your username and password, same one we used at the command prompt, and then you have access to this graphical interface where you can control your databases. More importantly, what we'll probably use this for most often is usually to validate that the information made it into a table. So for example, if I was writing entries for my faculty table, I can see all the entries that made it into that table right here. And I can edit them, copy them, delete them. And you can do all those tasks from these windows. But we're going to write applications outside of here that are going to talk to this database, write information to a table, read the information back. And this will be a really handy interface for just checking to see if it worked, mostly, right? The database structure is now created. For me, it's going to be Java Book 2. For you guys, it's going to be Java Book. All right, so I just want to explain this interface. I also wanted it to be really clear that any of the commands that I might use, for example, from a SQL query window, I can also use here. So if I want to use my Java book database, and sometimes you have to issue this command first from a prompt to tell it that you're switching which database you're connecting with. And now if I type select, star from star, that's not really a good thing, but that would now be attached to this database, not any of the others that use command. And so you can run any of those SQL commands, anything at all that you've learned can be run from this prompt. And I just want to reiterate that a couple of times so you guys get that to stick in your head. So I can do all my database work from a prompt, or I can do all my database work from Phpmyadmin. If you really want to walk this path and you want to get even deeper into MySQL database administration and creation and manipulation, there are some really cool software packages you can download. One of my favorites is this one, Mysql Workbench. I'll spring it up really, really quickly. And this is a little bit different than both of those. So first of all, command prompt can be clunky, right? A lot of people don't like it. Web-based can sometimes be problematic too. Sometimes it's limited. But we do have products like this that allow you to connect to the database. Once again, the VPN is required for all of these connections, and I want you to keep that in mind too. And now you have an environment that looks a whole lot more like SQL Server Management Studio. And once again, you can run out, type up your queries here, hit the little lightning bolt to execute them, and you can see all your database tables and data on the sidebar here. It's a lot more like SQL Server Management Studio. So if you're really into it and you want to really explore this pathway, here's another tool you can use. All right, so 3 different ways. This is a standalone client, must be downloaded and installed. It is completely free though. Phpmyadmin is web-based. Mysql Monitor, which is the prompt version, by the way. All right. So we did everything we needed to do pretty much to catch up to what the book wanted us to do. And I'm trying to get the book back up on the screen. Is that somewhere out there? There it is. All right. And so we completed this step just now, a little bit roundabout way. The next thing that we're going to do is try to complete these next series of steps. And I'm going to be real frank with you. It is 10 after 7 right now. This sometimes goes really smoothly, and this sometimes can be kind of nightmarish. All right. And it depends on a couple of different factors. And it's really, really important as I demonstrate this that you guys pay really close and careful attention to the steps so that you don't mess them up. If you do mess them up, set up a one-on-one with me and we'll get it fixed. But I want to be really clear on where we're going with this. When we come back next week, we're probably going to repeat this step if necessary, fix anybody's problems as necessary, and then we'll actually dig into the chapter work just to get to the sample assignment to see if the database connection is even working. All right. From there, we will start working on the exercises. So we might be in this chapter for at least another week, maybe 2. But it's an important chapter. I might argue maybe the most important one in the book. So you take it for what it's worth. All right. The next step that we're going to perform is to type this command at the prompt. So if you still have your Putty prompt up, please type that command in. Now I'm going to type use space the name of my database. And remember, if you named it correctly, it should be your username underscore and then Java book. Since I'm creating a second one, I'm calling it Java book 2. So that command is just simply telling MySQL, hey, any other commands I type right now? That's the database I'm using. So please type in use your username underscore and then Java book. Next, we're going to try to run this command. However, we got an issue. So we're going to have to actually drop that out of the prompt here to do a little bit of work. So let's first jump back to the core shell. So let's take ourselves back to Unit 4 in the core shell. And I want to point out a couple of things. And this is kind of a bizarre approach, frankly. What the author does with his book is he provides a link in the book to a spot where you can download the SQL file that we need in order to build our database. And here is the link for it. There's one separate one for the 11th edition. And I thought really long and hard about removing the link, but I know I have some students who have the code with their book and they want to use it and they want to dig in there and find it there. And you know what? Go for it. But I saved you a bunch of trouble and I downloaded the file here. And more importantly, I tweaked that file for you as well. So I want you to go to Unit 4, go to the exercise, and download this file. And to download it, all you have to do is simply click on it, and it will just drop right down into your browser like this. And I would recommend once you have it downloaded, go find it, and then open it up with a text editor. All right, and I want you to take a moment and get there. So I'm hoping everybody's gotten this far. Let's just assume, okay, you have. When you open up the file, I took basically what was the author's original file and I adjusted it, assuming all the steps that we've already taken. Okay, so what will happen in here is if you start scrolling through, you're going to recognize SQL code that first attaches to a database, right? Then checks to see if the tables are already there. And if they're already there, it drops them. That shouldn't be an issue for us. We could probably comment that out. And then it goes through and it creates all the tables we need with all the fields. And then it begins inserting into each table all the data that builds the tables. All right. And there's a complex series of commands here. And really what the author did originally is he was first having you drop a database, create it. And why would you drop a database before you create it? Well, just in case it was created, it wasn't created correctly, or if you're a teacher like me and you do it every semester, you would drop it, recreate it, and do the whole thing over again. From there, it creates it. It sets all the permissions, just like the book showed us. But I'm not worried about that. I left the comments in here so you could see it, but we're just going to start with this command here. So I'm going to start with this command, and then what will happen is we're going to take this file. We are going to FTP this to Apollo. We're going to navigate to the folder where this is, and then we're going to trigger MySQL to load the script and then run it and build the database basically in like a second flat, you know? So rather than us doing all this work manually, that's ridiculous. Why would we take the time to do that when we can just run a script that does it for us? All right. So let's get on the process of this. So the first step is to download the file and put it somewhere on your file system. So somewhere here, apparently I've downloaded this more than once because it's got that, you know, the parentheses around it. But it doesn't really matter if it has a parentheses around it or not. What I would like you guys to do now is go back to your prompt here, and we're going to begin by logging out of MySQL. So at this prompt, I want you to type the following command. I think you just type bye. Nope, it's not bye. All right, let's try exit. All right, and there it is. Bye is what the message that it sends back. So if you're at a MySQL prompt, type exit so we get back to the $ prompt. Now what I would like you to do is type the following command. And this is an important command line command, which is pwd, and press enter. And what this stands for is print working directory. And what you should see listed is a / the home directory, which is where all the user accounts are, and then a / your username. Now that means that where you're located in the file system is inside this folder. And so, for example, if I want to take a look at what's inside my own folder here, the way to do that from a Linux command prompt is to type ls and then press enter. And this is a simplistic version of the command. And so, okay, well, it says public HTML. That's really useful. And in fact, public HTML is a folder inside of my home folder. Let's type a different version of this command now. Type this command, ls space -al. And this is a little bit more verbose version of the same command. And if you're curious, what does ls stand for? It's list. Basically, that's their way of saying list the files. When you add those two switches to it, that's what these are considered. It will give a verbose listing with all the permissions, the ownership, the file size, and the file name all in one thing. So all of the files that you see listed here, you might say, well, where were these files before? And here's what's happening. Any file on a Linux system that starts with a dot is a hidden file. Same is true on a Macintosh, by the way. That's how they hide files on those file systems. You just put a dot in front of them. Then this one here is public HTML. This is where we put all our web pages. And I'll have you notice that in the first column here, how there's all these different letters. And basically the very first letter in this indicates that if it's a directory or if it's a file. If it's a dash, it's a file. If it's a D, it's a directory or a folder. All right. What are these other things? Well, these are commands for user levels. So there's owner, group, and user and public, or is it owner, group, and public, I think is how it goes, with a read, write, execute, RWX, for each one of those levels. And so for public HTML, the owner can read, write, and execute. People part of the same user group can read and execute, and the public can read and execute. You don't want people being able to write to your web pages, so that's what the permissions are. Now, I want to navigate myself into a spot where I can get the file I'm about to upload. And probably the easiest place for us to do that is to put it in the root of our public HTML folder, the same spot where we put our web pages. Because if you think about how FileZilla works, that's how we do it, right? All right, so we are going to use FileZilla to do the upload. So if you I'm assuming everybody's got this piece of software installed. And if not, please let me know so I can help you install it. But I'm going to launch a fresh session of this on purpose. Once you have this up and running, I think most of you know how to do this already, but I'm going to reiterate the steps. You bring up FileZilla. In the host window, you type apollo.gtc.edu. For the username, put in your username. And for your password, put in your password. And then go ahead and press enter, and then you will be connected to Apollo. And then what we're seeing here on the right side of the screen, of course, is the remote view. So these are your files. These two windows here are your files on the Apollo server. These two windows here are the files on your local file system. All right. Let me now go ahead and find that file to transfer it. So I'm going to transfer the file, and then I'm going to take a pause to make sure everybody's caught up with me. And I'll make sure everybody's up to speed. So don't worry if you're falling behind or you're lost or whatever. I'm going to get you caught up, so don't freak out. All right. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go find that SQL file, and I know it was in my my downloads folder, so I got to find that here. And that's going to be on my C drive in my user folder. And sometimes, I'll tell you that it can take a little bit of hassle to find it. So sometimes it almost is easier if you just grab the file. And here's my tip for you guys. And that's exactly what I'm going to do, is rather than go hunting for it, I'm just going to move this to my desktop. Oops, that's not where I wanted to go. Let's Control-Z that. Back to downloads. And we're going to move this to the desktop and just drop it right there. Okay. So now I can just come over to this side here and find that SQL file. Super easy right there. And then once I have it located, I'm going to drag and drop it over to Apollo. Now you can see I've already done this, right? So it's already over there. I'm just going to do it again. No big deal. Drag and drop it, overwrite it. But I do want it in the root of your Apollo account, because that'll be the easiest place for us to find it. All right, I'm going to pause the video for just a second. Now I'm going to check in with everybody, and I just want to make sure everybody's okay. All right, so now that we have the SQL file here, I am now going to go back to the prompt, and I'm going to type a command, because right now I'm still in my home directory, and where I want to go is I want to move into this directory, public HTML. That's where our web pages are. So at the prompt, I'm going to type cd space public _ HTML, and then press enter. Nothing happened. We moved folders is what happened. All right. So how can I prove that? Let's type pwd again. And now I can see that I'm in that folder. And then if I do my list command, ls-al, I will now see all the same stuff here that I see listed right down here in FileZilla, right? Same folders, same files. Now this is really an important step, because in order for the script to read into the database correctly, we have to be at the right point in our file system from the Putty prompt before we run it. Okay, and that's a pretty important little piece, by the way. All right, so here we go to the next step, by the way. All right, jumping back over to the book, wherever that may happen to be, all those tabs and windows. And now we're going to switch back into MySQL. So we have to log back into MySQL, type these two commands, and then hopefully they will work. But there will be some caveats. So we'll take this one step at a time. All right, so here's the first caveat. Back to the Putty. And now we're going to log back into MySQL on the command prompt. So MySQL -u space username space -p. You'll be prompted for your password again. Go ahead and type it in. And you're back to the prompt. I'll take a pause here for just a sec. All right, make sure you guys are all caught up. Once you're at the MySQL prompt again, we want to make sure we're using the right database. So I'm going to type use my username, right? Oops, underscore, and then Java book. So I'm going to let Java book be the one. That's the one I'm going to work with. And then I'm going to go ahead and press enter. All right. Hopefully you guys are all good still. All right. Next thing that we're going to do is we're going to type source, just as listed here, and then the name of the script file. So it's script, spelled correctly, .sql, semicolon. Don't forget that semicolon. And then press enter. All right. Now, this is pretty crazy, but it went in, and I want you to show you what happened on my screen here, right? I typed in that command, and it said database changed, whatever, and then it started running the command. Every command in that file, it started running. Some of them worked perfectly. Some of them had a warning. Some of them have errors. It's okay, by the way. The errors are expected. And then it will end like this. So it will do a whole bunch of things. So what this just did, this is really crazy, you guys, right? So we're at a prompt. We fed in a text file that had all our SQL code already written. Remember, create the tables, insert the information, and all that. It did all that work for us. And all I had to do was load up the file, press enter, boom, did it. We just built a whole database with a couple of keystrokes. Okay, it took us a while to get there, but we did it. It would have been faster than typing SQL commands all night. And here's the other thing that's very interesting is whenever you're working with a database, any database that understands the SQL language, you can export the entire database into a text file, bring it to a different database, and read it in just the same way. Isn't that cool? Right? But what this allows us to do is now we can work with this without having to go through the manual process of it. So let's make sure that it actually worked. This is how we make sure. Now we're going to go back to Phpmyadmin, right? And then you're going to find your account. You're going to log in. You're going to find your account. You're going to go to your Java book. And you got to remember, I just repopulated the same database is what I did. And then when you click on that and expand that little arrow or click on it, it should bring up all the tables. You should have a whole bunch of tables listed. And then if it also worked right, you should be able to look at the rows column here and see how many entries are listed. So anyone that's got like more than none, basically, it's got data in there, you can click on it and you can go into that table and see the result. Okay, so I was just helping Javier here, who is on screen right now, and we got his SQL file uploaded and everything. And then Cody, thank you, Cody, pointed out the fact that one little thing that we have to tweak in our script file, so you have to open up that script file before you upload it to Apollo, so I forgot that step and I apologize, is change what he's changing right now. So on line 11 there, he's removing my username and now placing his username into the mix here. Save the file, go back to FileZilla and re-upload it.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to do that. Yep.
No, we could have had even more fun, and we could have just had him edit it on the Unix command line. That would have been interesting, right?
That's what I did for mine. Yeah.
All right.
Okay.
And so now that you have that file loaded up correctly, you should be able to hit the up arrow here.
Up arrow. Okay.
All right. Go ahead and press enter. Let's go back to Phpmyadmin.
Yeah, let's refresh that. There we go. Okay.
Yeah, and let's make sure. Yep, all his tables and stuff are there.
Yep.
All the data is there. All right. So here's what we're going to do now. I'm going to pause the recording, and I just want to make sure everybody's okay. And I realize we're we're also out of time, so this recording is going to end shortly hereafter, by the way. So I'm just pausing the recording for a moment.